Sentinel online. Now loading the Beast Unleashed podcast.
This is Bob Skir, writer of X-Men and Beast Machines, and you're listening to Geekcast Radio Network.
Hello and welcome to the Beast Unleashed podcast. This is going to be an interview with Robert and Skir. I am TFG and Mike. I'm joined with Pecan Court Michael. Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going. And Steve Megatron.
Hello.
So we've been planning and plotting here at Geekcast Radio Network and the Beast Unleashed podcast. Since we started Beast Machines on TBU, my whole plan was to eventually talk to Bob Skir, and we've done that. And you're going to hear that next. Do we want to say anything about it before we go to the interview, guys?
Awesome. Yeah, it was great. We had a really good time talking with Bob, and you know, it may have run a little long, but we enjoyed every minute of it. It was a fantastic conversation.
Yes, and you're going to hear that fantastic conversation now.
And what did you do in the war, Daddy? Well, honey, I made gardening equipment to help the troops plant petunias. Really, Daddy?
Although our task does not appear glamorous or exciting, these trees carry our best hope for the future.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was only thinking about myself instead of all the homeless termites.
And what would you rather be doing? Sticking your tail into a computer socket?
Beats the heck out of plowing your little field of dreams.
I think it's high time you dialed back on the attitude.
Oh, well, how about I make like a tree and
That would be just fine by me, you impudent little...
You'll bark as bad as my bite!
I can't imagine where that came from.
Yeah, must have been some kind of glitch.
We must delete it from memory.
Yeah, done.
Hello and welcome to the Geekcaster Radio Network. This will be an interview featured on the Beast Unleashed podcast. I am your host, TFG and Mike, and joining me is Michael Wilson. Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good. And Steve Megatron. Hello.
Hello.
We are here with the man who is responsible for writing on shows such as Beetlejuice, X-Men, Batman the Animated Series, Godzilla the Series, and of course Beast Machines. Hello to Robert and Skir.
Hey there, how are you?
I hope I didn't mess up your last name there.
I heard Skir, that's pretty much how it's pronounced.
Okay. How are you, sir?
I'm doing very well. How about you guys?
Pretty good, pretty good.
Oh, what would you like to talk about?
Well, we're going to start off with some, just some general stuff. Where did you grow up? What was your childhood like and stuff like that?
What was my childhood like? That's one of these, come in, the doctor will see you now kinds of questions. I grew up on Long Island in Oyster Bay. I spent the first 18 years of my life there. I went away to college to the University of Virginia down in Charlottesville. Then I came out to California, to Los Angeles, and got a master's degree in screenwriting from UCLA. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, really. That's when I was, watching the Adam West Batman on TV, and that's when Star Trek was brand new, and I watched Lost in Space, and lots of other shows that you guys probably don't remember because they were so damn long ago. I grew up reading comics, going to comic conventions, reading all the science fiction I can get my hands on, and just loving it. I mean, I spent more time in the Marvel Universe when I was growing up, and the universe we inhabit right now. And just to completely date myself, I was 16 when Star Wars was released, and it was almost like witnessing the atomic bomb. There was this giant change in the culture. First of all, with Star Wars being what seemed like a gargantuan fad, and then seeing it growing into something that was actually, it settled into being a myth after a while. I mean, it entered our mythology and our national consciousness, our cultural consciousness. But when Star Wars was first released, for the first 2 years, until Empire came out, it was just like, oh, okay, Star Wars is everywhere, okay, and when's the next thing going to come along? That's what most people thought. People like us were just couldn't get enough of it. So anyway, forgetting Star Wars for a minute, I grew up on lots of science fiction, grew up on lots of comic books. I was a voracious reader and loved science fiction films, and particularly Universal horror movies and all that kind of stuff. So I guess the bottom line is, whereas I am a professional writer, whereas I am a college professor, I am a huge, first and foremost, a huge fan of all of this. And most of the people that I know who are professionals in this industry are huge fans.
What got you interested in writing? Was it something that happened as a kid? Was it something that like for me personally, I started writing because I write poetry and stuff like that. I started writing because I used to love to read. I love reading. So what got you interested in writing?
I was always interested in writing and storytelling, and it's a very strange thing to look back on, but whenever I was a kid watching cartoons, I'm talking like as a little kid watching cartoons, things would strike my ear funny, and I'd say, well, would he have said that, or would he have said it more like this? And so there I am, 4, 5, 6 years old, dialogue editing in my head, because when people wouldn't say things that sounded right, it kind of like broke the kind of spell in storytelling and stuff. And I realized very early that, to me, the really cool thing, more than the animation or whatever else, or, in terms of film, as I grew older, more than the directing of films, the story took real precedent for me. I mean, I was much more impressed with George Lucas for writing Star Wars than for directing it. I was much more impressed with Steven Spielberg for coming up with Close Encounters than directing it. And that movie is a directing feat. I mean, I just absolutely love it. The bottom line is, it was always the story that came first for me. And when I was in high school, when I was in college, I wrote short stories, but I was always obsessed with film. And for reasons unknown, it took until I was a sophomore in college for me to finally put the two together and say, I know, I can be in film and be a writer if I just write movies. So just from that point on, it was sort of a single-minded thing for me that I wanted to write screenplays and just, basically, and write.
Nice.
Yeah, very cool.
Bob, we checked the IMDb page. I'm not sure if you update that or if you care, but it doesn't show much for the last 3 years or so. What are you currently doing?
What I'm currently doing is a preschool series that is going to be premiering in the fall. It's being produced. It's an Italian co-production. I'm writing it with Craig Miller, who created the series Pocket Dragons, and we're having an amazing time on it. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm also writing a romantic comedy screenplay. I've always written screenplays while I was here, and sometimes I will write a screenplay at the same time as doing a series, and sometimes I'll just take some time off and just concentrate on screenwriting. So I did a series a few years ago called Dino Squad, and then I took a few years off to continue writing screenplays. So right now I'm back doing a series.
How do you juggle that with your assistant professorship at UCLA?
At UCLA, I teach animation writing about once every other year, and then I go back to writing. And I love teaching at UCLA. It's fantastic. It's great students. It's an incredible workshop there. I don't know if you know the people who come out of it, but historically, the people who wrote Yellow Submarine were there. Nancy Cartwright was in the animation workshop. She went on to do a voice in an animated series. I forget what it's called. Oh, yeah, The Simpsons. David Silverman, who's one of their main directors, is a UCLA guy as well, and so is Mike Anderson. I mean, these are all names. These are people who've won like Emmys and Emmys and Emmys working on The Simpsons over the last 20 years. And, I'm surprised they're all on one show. You think they can get other work, but they're just stuck on The Simpsons. Who knows? But a lot of great people came from UCLA. It's kind of an ironic thing. As a grad student, I got my master's degree in screenwriting. But while I was there, I took animation classes because I was always fascinated with animation. I made animated films when I was a kid. I did all kinds of animation when I was a kid. I mean, not well, but so. So I drew, and I did, like puppet animation, like the Ray Harryhausen stuff. They had these Mego Star Trek dolls in the mid-'70s, and so I would animate those and make little Star Trek movies. And so I always loved animation, and I could not justify going to UCLA and not partaking in their animation workshop. So I started taking classes there, and I made lifelong friends and people who I just became professionally bonded with. Howdu Payton was a friend of mine from the very first class that we took in animation there, and we went on to do Godzilla and Extreme Ghostbusters together. And he has a gigantic career, but he's most famous in a way, among all the other things that he's done, for Animaniacs and Pinky and the Brain. Those are the sort of groundbreaking things that he worked on. But I've made incredible friends while I was there, and ironically, because my career went into animation writing for television, people I went to school with and my professors there have sort of recast me thinking I was an animation student there, whereas I was actually a screenwriting student. My parents were like, well, why are you wasting your time with an animation class? And I'm like, well, you never know. But you see, that's the thing, is that you do, in fact, never know. You follow your passions and you see where they lead you. When I was a kid, my best friend found an antique store that was selling comic books. Like, here's a chest of drawers and here's an ottoman and, oh yeah, here's this stack of comic books I came into. And he was selling off this stuff like it was junk. And he knew it was worth something, but it wasn't worth his time to track down who would actually buy and pay for such things. So he let the stuff go for what was, in retrospect, a pittance, even though my friend who discovered the place bought them for a lot of money. You're probably wondering where I'm going with all this. Anyway, I was reading comic books voraciously, and my parents were disconcerted. It was like I was 14, 15, 16. When are you going to stop reading those joke books, funny books, whatever they were calling them? And they couldn't figure out, put them down and grow up. So my friend found these comics, and I bought one of them for $25. It was Silver Street number 6 or 7. It was the first appearance of the original Daredevil. It was a World War II era comic book, and I spent $25 on it. And I sold it at a convention for $250. And that was when my parents stopped calling them joke books and started referring to me as, it's my son the speculator. Oh, he's such a genius. And so I went to a comic book convention, and I came back with a whole bunch of comic books. My parents were like, oh, my son, the speculator, what did we come back today with? And I showed them a comic book that I had bought, and they said, oh, my God, that's fantastic. What's it worth? And I looked at the cover, and it was like 35 cents. Like, it's worth 35 cents. Well, we thought you were going to buy comics that were worth something. And I'm like, someday this comic will be worth something. Well, to who? That comic book was, and I'm not kidding, that comic book was Giant-Sized X-Men number 1.
Wow.
And
nice.
I don't know what the street value is for Giant-Sized X-Men number 1. All I know is that I have made more money from that comic book, and I've never sold it. I made my reputation working on X-Men, working with those characters. And the reason I want to work on that show is because I followed these characters, and I loved these characters. And my parents thought that taking animation classes was a waste of time. And my parents thought that reading comic books was a waste of time. And to find that particular comic book was, a waste of 35 cents. And you just have to follow. If you follow things that excite you, they will take you to exciting places. That sounds so trite, but it really is true. And that's a case in point. And also, parenthetically, and this, I hate to drop names and shit, but basically, what's really cool is that comic book was written by Len Wein, who is now my best friend. So
it all works out.
You follow things that are important to you, and you just, if you're single-minded about it, if you're really serious about it, you never know where it's going to take you. So yeah, I was a huge fan of this stuff, and I've made it my life. At great cost. I spent the entire 1980s going to graduate school as a screenwriter, writing screenplays. That was the yuppie era where everybody was buying BMWs and having families and, getting really, for what was then, kind of wealthy. And, there I was eating Doritos and staying in, Friday nights. And, I didn't have the great life and career that all these people were having. But I stuck with what I wanted, and I wound up with what I wanted. And consequently got to write for every character I've ever loved, including Batman and the X-Men and Superman, and I'm going to say this really loud, Wolverine. So, it's been a really wonderful ride. That's what I'm just going to say.
Well, that's a good lead-in for the next question, which is, although we can always visit your website or IMDb, for that matter, for a complete list, could you tell our listeners some of the television credits that you've had besides Beast Machines.
The first show I did was Beetlejuice, and that was for Fox Kids. And the story editor I worked with on that went on to develop X-Men, and I helped him with some of that because he wasn't as familiar with some of the characters. So I did some character breakdowns for him so he would know who the characters really, really were. And I was adamant about that because I wanted to make sure that Wolverine was not just the angry guy with the claws. I wanted to make sure that Logan was really Logan, that you wouldn't define Cyclops by his eye beams, but more because of his relationship to Professor X and because of the responsibility on his shoulders. Anyway, I worked on X-Men, and it was really important to me. And I worked on the first Batman, the animated series, which was a really groundbreaking series. I was really proud of that show because the show really came out so wonderfully, and I'm very proud of that show because it was an honor to be asked to write for it, and I got to write 3 pretty good episodes. I'm not proud of it in the way it's like my series, but I'm proud that those guys invited me along because that was a real game changer. I got to write for Spider-Man when they did the Spider-Man series for Fox in the 90s. They did an Extreme Ghostbusters series. That was a lot of fun. Godzilla, which was a dream come true for me. I mean, Godzilla was like my guy when I was a kid, and I got to do an animated series based on it that was really smart and not just silly, because there were silly Godzilla shows in the past, and I was determined to let people know that this series would not feature Godzuki. I wrote to write a Jim Henson show, which was a lot of fun because you get to write for, Muppets and cartoon characters. There was a show called Jim Henson's Dog City, and it was great because you got to write for Muppets, you got to write animation, you got to write about writers making animation, you got to write a detective show, and you got to write a comedy about dogs. And so you had all these plates spinning at the same time. And it was a remarkably difficult show to write because everything had to be there all at the same time. They had to think like detectives. They had to think like dogs. They had to move like Muppets. They had to be funny. They had to be noir. And so there you were, like one of those plate-spinning guys running around trying to make all these things happen at the same time. And that was tricky and fun and a really goofy show. I have friends who just loved that show when they were growing up, which makes me feel old.
It sounds like it'd be a good thing to check out.
It's a good thing to check out. It was a fun, goofy show. It was really good. Well, and along the way, I wrote for other shows as well, like a few episodes here and there of different shows. But those were kind of like the bigger highlights. Oh yeah. I did a series. I did The Mask as well. Story edited and wrote a bunch of episodes of The Mask, which was a lot of fun too.
It's funny that you've worked on Batman the Animated Series because after this podcast ends at episode 30, Steve and I are going to be reviewing every episode of Batman the Animated Series on a new show called Legends of the Dark Knight.
Well, that's cool. Are you going to talk about all the different Batman animated series or just like that one? Or?
Just that one and Batman Beyond.
I was going to say, you really got to talk about Batman Beyond because that show was to me a miracle. I was around. I wasn't on the series in any way, but I was around. I knew the guys who were putting it together, and every time I would hear about what they were doing, I was like, well, here's the mandate. This is what they want. They want a teenage Batman. They want it in the future, and I'm like, this thing is genetically engineered for failure. Like there are so many ways this thing can be awful, and what they wound up with was when they showed the pilot. When I watched the pilot, within the first 10 minutes, I go, this is now part of Batman's mythology. They made it stick so hard before they even got to Kevin. It was already, okay, they've really sold this fucking thing. Excuse me, I'm really sorry. But it's
okay. We're explicit, so you don't have to worry about it.
This thing is now part of Batman's mythology. As the series went on, I think it's the best action-adventure series that Warner Brothers ever did. The look, the animation, the writing, everything about it is utterly spectacular. So I would watch that show, day after day, and I would just be amazed. I would just be in awe. And all the different influences in there, all the stuff from like Blade Runner, all the stuff from like all of Jack Kirby's work. There's a lot of Spider-Man thrown in there, but in the best possible way. The series harkened back to a lot of things, without feeling derivative in any way. And my favorite part of the show was it's Batman in the future fighting all new villains. They only brought back Mr. Freeze. They brought back the Joker for a single movie. They brought back Ra's al Ghul in a really cool story that answers a really important question. And aside from that...
A very creepy question, actually.
Say again?
A very creepy question, actually.
Well, it's a very creepy answer. But
yeah.
Okay, what question was that episode designed to answer? In a world that needs Batman, why does Batman allow himself to be old when the Lazarus Pit is there? Why doesn't Bruce take a bath in the Lazarus Pit, go back to being Batman, and fight the good fight? And if you know Batman mythology, you know that the Lazarus Pit is there. It makes no sense that he's not using it. And so you do that episode, and there it is for all time, point blank. This is why Batman absolutely, positively will not use that thing. Because he's not Ra's al Ghul. Because he would rather age and die than become this immortal zombie sort of... death is natural, and he accepts that. I mean, and how creepy was that episode with,
Yeah, it was.
It's a wonderfully poignant episode. It's a very, very sad episode, and it's a very, very dark, sad episode. And the brilliance is, this is Paul Dini in action here. It starts out with the funniest sequence in the entire series. Because it starts out, with that ridiculous Andrew Lloyd Webber play based on Batman's life. And it's so completely ridiculous. And they go from this incredibly light, frothy, silly sequence to an ending that you feel like you've been, you've had your heart ripped out. It's one of the reasons I think Paul Dini is one of the best people in this business, and he remains so, into decades. He's just an incredible writer.
Getting on with the DC cartoons, do you prefer writing for DC or Marvel?
That's an interesting question. My heart is really in the Marvel universe because I just have such an absolute love for that universe. That being said, a lot of it was because it had this incredible continuity and it was a place with a timeline. And since then, they've kind of decided to shuffle everything around in ways that, and retrofit things and just make things, they sort of jumble it up. But the bottom line is, whatever show I'm working on, it's like I love that universe. There are so many things I love in the DC universe. I love the characters there. If the show is really good and the story is really good, I'm there 1,000%. So it doesn't matter to me if it's Batman or if it's Spider-Man, as long as the story is good and as long as the hook in the characters is really good. If I had to choose when I was a kid between the companies, ultimately it came down to Marvel. But my dog is named Big Barda, so that's got to count for something. And for those of you out there, Big Barda is, give yourself some points. If you don't know who Big Barda is, Google it. Read Jack Kirby's work, and you will grow.
How big is your dog?
Oh, she's a German Shepherd.
Oh, nice. Excellent.
So she's very beautiful, and if you cross her, she'll rip your throat out, just like Big Barda.
Nice. Both of these franchises have long histories and plenty of stories already written. When writing for cartoons, do you go back to the old stories and revise them for television, or do you try to create your own new original stories?
That depends on the series, and it depends on if I'm in charge of it or not. I was not in charge in any way of the original X-Men series, and that's a good thing ultimately. If I had been, I would have just taken, literally, I really wanted to do this, just take the Byrne Claremont issues and just adapt them almost verbatim in an exact timeline, so that you took this piece of history that was just so wonderful and just rendered it. And it would have been perfect. It would have been incredible. It would have been flawless. But it wouldn't have been the series that they did, and that was an incredible series, and I think that the series should have its own voice and be its own thing, independent from the comics, although it should be consistent as well at the same time. It's a huge paradox. But here's how it cuts for me. It all comes down to the characters and the tone. It doesn't matter, the fidelity that you have to the book. as long as you get the characters right. I developed X-Men Evolution, and the idea was, hey, let's put these kids in a high school, which is a really radical idea, taking the X-Men and putting them in high school. I mean, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, except that's where they started. They were initially teenagers in a school. After a while, they became freedom fighters, and so the X-Mansion stopped being a school for mutants and started being a haven for refugees, which I think is kind of a mistake, but that's just my opinion. The bottom line is, we did an X-Men series where we took extreme liberties with a lot of the characters and a lot of the timeline, and took characters and made them teenagers, whereas they had never been shown as teenagers before, and took a series of characters and put them in situations that were not anything resembling what you'd seen in the Marvel Universe. But as long as the tone was consistent with the X-Men's tone, the amount of seriousness, as long as the characters remained consistent with who the characters were, then the series would work. So you can take Jean Grey and you can take Scott Summers, you can take Nightcrawler. As long as you are true to who those characters are, you can put them in any setting and it will ring as true, because the personalities are absolutely paramount there. And so to me, it has less to do with, are these things faithful to the comic books? It has more to do with, are the characters true to themselves? I've done adaptations of some of the comics, and some of them have come out very well, and some of them have come out less well. One of my favorite stories I ever did was Captive Hearts, which is an episode about the love triangle between Wolverine, Cyclops, and Jean Grey. Now, that was something I came up with based on 2 panels that Chris Claremont did back in the 70s that nobody ever picked up on or did anything with. And I don't remember anybody ever doing anything really with that love triangle. So I put it in that episode, and then it started showing up in the comics, and right now it is the central thing between those 3 characters. So I take great pride in the fact that I introduced that, and if you can find an instance where they really played that up that predates that episode, let me know and I'll stop taking credit for it. But right now, I came up with that. I'm very proud of that. And this is a complete tangent away from where I was going initially, which was Captive Hearts is a story about those 3 characters. It's based on an issue of the X-Men in which Wolverine wasn't there, Cyclops wasn't there, and Jean Grey was dead. So putting these characters in the center of a story where none of them were even in the book at that point, it shows you what a departure you can make while still keeping the story structure essentially there. This is the story that introduced the Morlocks, it introduced Callisto, and if you look at it structurally, the structure of the story is very close to the comics, but the cast of characters is very different, and the theme of the story is very different because we're following the theme of these 3 characters, and they weren't there initially. What happens in the animated series is that Callisto kidnaps Scott because he's a brave leader, and she figures if he helps her sire children, then the Morlocks will always have great leaders. Initially, what she had done was she had kidnapped Angel, and she was going to use him as breeding stock. But because we used different characters, it changed the theme of the whole thing. It wasn't faithful to the original story. It was completely different, but it was really, really good, and it captured a lot of the essence of what made the original story good as well. I did an adaptation of Days of Future Past, which was a lot closer to Days of Future Past. And
I remember that episode.
Yeah. I remember it in the actual comics.
Right. And here's the thing. It's one of the most unforgettable comics of all time. It redefined the X-Men, and in many ways it redefined the Marvel Universe. The episode that we did was one of the most forgettable half hours of children's television ever done. So, whereas I'm very proud of the things that I did that worked out very, very well, I'm also very cognizant of the fact that whereas I would love to have done a faithful adaptation of Days of Future Past, what we wound up with ultimately when we did that story was something that did not live up to anywhere near the original subject matter. What I'm hoping is someday, you know how Marvel does all these made-for-DVD movies? I'm hoping that he sits down and says, okay, you know what? Let's do Days of Future Past. Let's do it the right way. Let's do it as the story was told in the comics. Let's do it for keeps, and let's do it right.
I've never actually read that comic, but I loved that episode. I loved all the time traveling episodes in the X-Men series. I don't know. I'm a sucker for time travel. Where's the DeLorean when you really need one? Besides cartoons, our podcasts. What are you gonna say, Bob?
Hold on, before we leave that topic. If you love that episode, I'm going to tell you something that I've never admitted before, and it's going to get me beaten up. But there you go. I know Harlan Ellison, and I love the guy. I love him as a writer. For those of you who don't know, he wrote the City on the Edge of Forever episode of Star Trek, which is one of the greatest time travel stories of all time. He also wrote some episodes of Outer Limits, including one called Soldier, which was utterly incredible. And he also wrote Demon with the Glass Hand, which is unbelievable. And the reason I bring up those three is, if you put those three together, you get The Terminator, which is why at the end of The Terminator, they credit Harlan Ellison saying that they acknowledge his works. Because when the movie first came out, they didn't acknowledge it, and James Cameron said that he really enjoyed and was influenced by The Outer Limits when he was writing Terminator, and Harlan Ellison was like, well, wait a minute, that's my stuff. I mean, you can't just use all my ideas and, not credit me. What the hell is that about? So they had some discussion. The next thing you know, there's an agreement reached that nobody can talk about, but one of the facets of it that is visible is Harlan Ellison's name is on The Terminator. Why am I bringing all this up? Oh, yeah, right. Okay. I know Harlan. I love Harlan. I'm hoping he doesn't punch me in the nose. In Demon with the Glass Hand, that episode of Outer Limits, it's the actress Arlene Martell who plays T'Pring in Star Trek. I bring that up for no reason whatsoever. Anyway, you have these time-traveling aliens who are coming back to Earth to stop the human race from being able to survive this upcoming catastrophe. And the way these guys are able to travel through time is they wear these time travel devices around their necks. And when you fight them, if you can grab onto it and rip it off, these guys get thrown into the future. And, goodbye, you're not a problem anymore. So when we were coming up with the Days of Future Past story, we decided to incorporate Bishop. And so Bishop came back in time instead of Kitty Pryde, which is how it was initially. So it's like, okay, well, we need to have Bishop travel back through time. He's not going to travel back into his own mind in the past the way Kitty Pryde did. How are we going to have him travel back in time? And it's like, well, why don't we have Forge as this old guy who comes up with this device that sends him back in time? And the question is, how do we send him back forward in time when he gets to be a problem for our guys? And so what I came up with was, Forge comes up with this armband, which is kind of a temporal device that enables him to remain somewhat outside time, which enables him to travel back in time. So he's got this armband on, so that when he's fighting our guys and becomes a problem and we need to get him out of the way, so like Rogue or whoever grabs the armband, rips it off, and he gets shunted right back into the future. So I'm hereby declaring, to my great shame and pride, I got that from Harlan Ellison. I got that from Demon with the Glass Hand. I freely admit it. It was a good lift because it made the story happen. But I'm not going to not admit the fact that I was heavily influenced by and used a really cool device that Harlan had come up with.
Besides cartoons, our podcasts mostly revolve around Transformers. Let's talk about some Beast Machine stuff. How did you first get involved with Beast Machines?
I was doing a lot of work at Fox in the 1990s. Fox was fantastic to be at. It was a great place. The executives were fantastic. They were doing great shows, and they were doing them the right ways, and they really understood what the properties were about and how to do them right instead of dumbing them down and making them safe for children, which is why the original X-Men series was so much about civil rights and why the original Batman series was so noir and dark, and there was all kinds of, it wasn't silly or frothy. Anyway, Fox was a great place to be, and when they were doing all the Marvel shows, I said, I've got to do Avengers. You've got to do Avengers. So they got the rights to do a whole bunch of the Marvel shows, and this will lead back to Transformers, I promise. And they got the rights to a bunch of the Marvel properties, and I said, I really, really want to do Avengers. Really want to do Avengers. I don't want to do Captain America. Don't want to do Iron Man. I want to do all the ones that no one's heard of before, because it'd be really cool to do the Vision and the Scarlet Witch and, Wonder Man and Tigra. And lo and behold, I got to develop that because the other characters, like Captain America and Thor, weren't available. So it lined up really nicely, and I got to develop my dream project. And I wrote this Bible that was fantastic. I was really, really proud of my work on it, and I was waiting with bated breath for them to greenlight the show so I could do the show that I really desperately wanted to do. Okay, that's backstory. I was called in for some meetings to do a new Transformer series because they were going to do a new Transformer series. Beast Wars was in syndication. It was wrapping up, and Fox had an interest in doing a CGI Transformer series to follow on its heels. So they called me and my writing partner Marty in to talk about the series, and they told us what they were looking for. And I was so eager to meet these people because it was a new set of executives over at, to me, they were new executives at Hasbro. These were people I'd never met before over at Mainframe. So I got to meet a whole bunch of new people. And I got to talk with them and sort of introduce myself, and they got to know, hey, this guy's a pretty good guy. Well, we'd like to work with him. Because I figured it would open doors for me and I could work for Mainframe. As somebody who worked on X-Men and who needed X-Men to be right because I was such a big fan, I had absolute respect for the fact that Transformers had a fan base that was so excited about it. And I didn't think I was a viable candidate to work on the show because I was not a huge Transformer fan or a Transformer veteran or a Transformer expert. So I figured, okay, I'm not going to get this gig, but I'll meet these really cool people. And they asked us if we had any ideas for what we wanted to do with Beast, a Beast Wars sequel, which then was called Beast Wars. Which you couldn't call Beast Wars anyway, because around the world they won't let you put the words war in the title of a show, which is why the show was called Beasties in the rest of the world. Anyway, I didn't think I would get the show. They would never hire us. I mean, we had nothing to offer. They asked us what we would do with the series if we were given a a Beast Wars series to do, and I kind of, nodded politely and smiled and, made murmuring noises and didn't come up with any ideas because I really didn't have any. And then it turns out that there was a wonderful development that was written by Marv Wolfman. He did this, he wrote up a Bible and came up with these incredible characters, this scenario, and it was really something terrific. And Marv had not story edited any series for Fox and didn't have a big relationship with a lot of the executives there, whereas Marty and I had a huge run of success. So the executives there knew us and liked us and totally trusted us. And so I take no pride in the fact that they offered the gig to Marty and I to finalize development on and spearhead the series that Marv had developed. So we had Marv there to write a bunch of the episodes and stuff, but I can take no credit for the development on Beast Machines, which it ultimately became called. It was given to us very, very much from Marv. So we were invited to write for the series because we had a great relationship at Fox. And 20 minutes after they offered it to us, and we said, yes, we'd love to do it, sure. That 20 minutes later, we get the phone call saying, congratulations, we've greenlit Avengers. And I'm like, that's my dream project. That's fantastic.
Oh, no.
I can't say yes to it because I just committed to another series. And just so you guys know, as a professional, if you commit to a series, you've committed. So you can't just say, oh, the thing I like better came along, so see ya. You can't do that. I mean, I was committed to Beast Machines, and it cost me my opportunity to write for my dream show. And, and that's the way it goes. I mean, you're in a wonderful position when you can say no to a dream project because you're working on something, else, bigger, whatever.
Well, you mentioned Dream Project. Have any of the executives that are doing Avengers Earth Mightiest Heroes now, that new series, have they offered you to write on any of those episodes?
I'm not working on that, no. I haven't seen it yet. I don't know if it's airing yet.
It's not bad.
What I've seen of it has looked really, really good. I would love to have written for it, but I don't know any of the executives currently at Marvel, and I don't know the story editors who are working there. So I wasn't really in the running. Like, by the time I found out about it and was able to contact people, it was kind of too late. They got great people. It's going to be probably a really, really terrific show. But, I wasn't there for that one, and I kind of regret that.
What, as far as Beast Machines goes, how much of Marv's original Bible made it into the series? Was it just copied from the Bible, or did you guys take liberties here and there from his original treatment?
The answer is both. When we first came in, they gave us a mandate. They said, we want to do something really, really different. We want to do a series which is a science fiction story, but we want to have a really, really spiritual undertone. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what? We want to have, sort of a, a very rich kind of spiritual. And I'm thinking, no, you're not really seriously. You make it sound like it's going to be like a religious epic or something. And they were like, well, we want to do something, very spiritual. And I'm like, okay. Now, Marvel's did not have that facet to it. So all the steps that you see that's spiritual are things that Marty and I brought to it. And a lot of it are things that, I came up with the harebrained idea of, why don't we do a 26-episode for television novel? Why don't we make this thing a singular story with a really strong through line and just make it like one long story?
There's no filler there.
If they want to make it spiritual, why don't I put the pedal to the floor and make it so outlandishly, like this giant religious epic, that they're going to, start pulling it back. I want to see how far they'll let me go with this. And the further we went, the more enthusiastic they were, and the more they let us do it. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, great. Because, I want to do things that are new. I want to do things that are meaningful. I don't want to tell stories where things blow up for no apparent reason. I want to do something where people argue about things and they're all defensible and right. I didn't want Megatron to be, a villain. I wanted him to have a point of view. And I wanted all of our characters to see the world very, very differently. And so as a consequence, people who watch the show, some people sided with Megatron because they really, really liked the idea of, let's make them all robots. And for me, initially when we talked about what's the core conflict going to be, the initial idea was, well, nature versus technology. That seems kind of obvious. And my personal feeling was, it's not that simple. If we got rid of all our technology and went back to nature, we'd all have dysentery, we'd be dying of the plague, excuse my language, there'd be shit everywhere because we don't have plumbing. We don't want, Renaissance pleasure fairs aside, we don't want to go back to nature. What we really want is a balance between technology and nature so that we get the best of both and so that they're both kind of fused together in the best possible balance. And so that's where the series became about the characters being, techno-organic, which I didn't come up with that. I'm not saying I came up with all the techno-organic stuff because that was part of the designs they were coming up with. They wanted to do a series that was very, very original. And since they had done robots, since they had done animals into robots, why not do things that were half robot and half animal and make them kind of like you can't tell, where one ends and where it begins. And so the idea of having, why don't we do this techno-organic thing where it becomes a series about finding a balance as opposed to going to one extreme or another. So Megatron represents being in the extreme of only technology, whereas our heroes come to a place, and it takes them a while to come to a place where it's like, okay, this is about finding a balance. So that was, to me, the core conflict. And it served us very well. And I'm very glad it wasn't just nature versus technology, because that's very obvious. And it's also, to my way of thinking, very, very wrong. But this is the kind of stuff that we talked about after Marv's involvement. Marv came up with the idea of, they go back to Cybertron, Megatron's in charge, our guys are on the run. There was these things called Viacons. One of them is Tankor, one of them is, I think it was originally it was like some of the characters had different...
Skybolt.
Jetstorm was initially called something else, so we've changed some of the names. But most of what you see there included the fact that, some of the characters that we see were other characters before who have changed. I don't remember if Tankor was initially Rhinonox or not. I don't know if that was something that we added to it or it was initially there with Marv. I don't recall that. All I know is that pretty much we used everything Marv had. We didn't throw any of that over the side, but we added a lot to it. And so all the spiritual stuff and a lot of the characterization stuff were things that we added on to what he was doing. But the things that he gave, every one of his ideas were incredible. And to this day, I feel bad that I got the job that kind of rightfully should have been his, because if he wrote the Great Bible, he's the one who should have been hired. But, I can't feel bad that, I can't feel guilty that they wanted to hire Marty and I because they wanted to hire us based on a good relationship they had with us. I just feel bad that Marv got, in a way, very, very slighted that way. So, so I'm hereby acknowledging everything that Marv did because it was so absolutely critical to that series.
Speaking of the series changing, as the series progressed, we noticed that more and more of the Beast Wars personalities began to emerge. For example, Rat Trap began to joke around more, invent gadgets. With the end of the second season, just as Megatron started to go back to his old personality and inserting more of the yes and more of his original personality traits. Were you purposely trying to incorporate things from the previous series?
The honest answer to that is really no. The honest answer is we just followed the characters. So as Rat Trap was there, we just had to find more and more things for Rat Trap to do, so he'd be building stuff and finding fun things to do. The character was always a funny character. If we found progressively funnier things for him to say or to do or whatever, then great, we did. But it wasn't
like making out with Botanica.
Say again now?
Like making out with Botanica?
Now, that is one of the most interesting moments in the entire series for me, because I wrote the outline for that. That was entirely mine, and I did not know they were going to kiss until they were kissing. That's God's honest truth. Those characters decided on their own that they were right for each other. It's one of these things where when you put two people in a room together and they absolutely don't belong together, they're going to gravitate to each other. Princess Leia is prim and proper. She'd like to be. Han Solo is, a pirate at heart. He's a rogue. So you put the two together, you're going to have fireworks. What happened with Botanica and Rat Trap, where it was, these two people did not belong in a scene together. Absolutely didn't. So I'm like, hey, let's throw these two together. It'd be fun having them locked in a room together, Like, now they got to deal with each other. And the next thing I knew, they were locking lips. It's like, all right, guys, go to it. But I didn't do that. They did it. And I think that's when you can tell something's really working for you, when the characters start making decisions without you making the decisions for them. So
I had read something similar to that, where I had read something that you had said before, which was that it happened without you knowing it was going to happen. And I thought that meant that, he sent off the draft to the animators, and the animators thought, wouldn't it be funny if they started smooching?
No, it's kind of the opposite, actually, because at first what happened was they kissed. Then they stop and they kind of look at each other, like shyly and go, "Oh, I don't know what happened. And then they kiss again." And then we get a note back going, "Okay, they're just going to kiss once." And I thought, well, it's more funny if they kiss and they're embarrassed about it, then they go back again, than if they just do it and they're just locked there. So my initial idea was they realize that they've kissed after they kiss, and then they start kissing. But no, what happened was I didn't know they were going to do this until the characters, the animators, we came up with that because the characters came up with that. I had no idea they were going to do that until I was writing it. So for those of you out there who are like aspiring writers, there comes a point where your characters start talking to you, and there comes a point when your characters start doing things that you didn't know they were going to do. It's a truism, like they said in writing class, like you're a great writer when your characters are coming alive, and when your characters, your writing is working for you when your characters begin to surprise you. And I thought I knew what that meant, but I really didn't know what that meant until I wrote a scene like that where I looked at the page and I'm like, what are you people doing? So there you go.
If you could do another Transformers series today, what would you do?
If I could do another Transformers series today, I would do the one they're doing now. Have you guys watched Transformers Prime yet?
Oh yeah.
I've seen the first 3 episodes of the 5-parter, and it's just amazing.
Well, I'm not involved with the series. I have no vested interest in the series whatsoever. That being said, I have read the first 26 episodes, and you guys have no idea what you're in for. It is so great, and I'm reading the scripts with awe and envy. I'm like, I would love to work on this thing because the writing is fantastic. The stories are fantastic. And the characters. I mean, I'm reading this thing and I'm like salivating. I'm having a wonderful time. So if you guys like what you're seeing so far, okay, this is an analogy for you. You know the pod race sequence in Phantom Menace?
Yeah.
Okay. Imagine if at the very end of the pod race sequence, you realize that's what it's like when they're just revving up their engines. By the time you finish this 5-part episode, you're going to realize, as amazing as that was, they're just revving up their engines. So where the series goes, it's great. So you guys are in for a real treat. So,
yeah, I'm loving everything about it so far, and I've only seen the first 3 episodes of the 5-parter. I can't wait till February.
You have no idea what's coming. It's so great. So the short answer is, if I could do any, it's a Transformer series, I want to do one just like the one they're doing now.
Well, maybe you can get in on season 2. Maybe write an episode for season 2 if they get a callback for season 2.
There is going to be a season 2, and I think they're going to do a spectacular job. Once again, I would love to be on board. I'm not on board, but the bottom line is, wow, it's really something to look forward to. So yeah, there's
much better than the movies.
Anything, but I will say, wow.
Nice, very nice.
Here's the thing, for me, it's thrilling when I can read people's work, and instead of saying, well, I would have said it this way, or I would have said it that way, or, oh, I saw that coming, or, oh, that would have been better. Instead, I'm reading these scripts going, oh, wow. And that's what you want.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Very nice. Yeah, I remember saying a while back to these two that, Ortsy and Kurtzman are capable of writing a very good, Transformers story, as long as you don't have Michael Bay coming in and putting a stamp on it.
Oh, yes.
It should be awesome. Yeah, but we won't get into that. Anyway, next question. We like to hear it when, voice actors have action figures from all the characters that they've given voices to. Did you collect the action figures from the Beast Machines line?
I didn't, because most of the designs didn't look like the characters that they were on the series. So whereas I would buy the X-Men characters that I wrote, because, Wolverine looks like Wolverine, and whereas I was thrilled to buy the Spike action figure, the X-Men Spike, not Buffy, whereas I was thrilled to buy that because I created that character. So it's like, oh my God, here's an X-Men, and I created him, and he's a doll! When I saw the Transformers characters, refresh my memory, maybe I'm wrong about this, but as I recall, the Beast Machines figures weren't based completely on what the characters looked like on screen.
No, they weren't.
They were way off in most cases.
Very different. So because they weren't on model, I didn't feel like, it's like, hey, look at this. I created this. Because I didn't. So if they had made them look like they looked in the TV show, I would have been, thrilled. But I didn't want to have the figures that was something other than what I created, because I would have felt almost fraudulent having them on my wall. But if I write a series, I want some action figures based on the characters that I wrote, because it just, it's a matter of pride saying, yes, I have some investment in that character. So I have this great maquette of Rogue in my room, because I wrote the Rogue's Tale, and I am so proud of that episode.
Nice. Yeah, it took a little while for the Beast Machines figures to really start looking like the characters on the TV. But
speaking of one they never made was the Cloak Megatron.
Right.
Yeah, if they had made figures that looked like those shows, I would have loved to have had them. Especially, Grand Mall Megatron, the giant Megatron head. I would love to have had that.
Well, they had the head, but it didn't turn into a ship. It turned into a robot.
Okay.
But they didn't have the first form of Megatron, where he turned from the dragon to the cloak.
Right.
Which would have been cool.
I spent a lot of time talking about the Marvel shows and stuff. I guess because there's so much history there. But I want to really focus on Beast Machines to say, just so it's said out loud, that is the piece of work I am most proud of. That's the piece of work that I think was the most thematically rich. It was the characters that were the most vibrant and alive for me, that I got to explore and really kind of grow with. And that I felt like, because we came up with a story on such a grand scale and got to follow our whims with it, being guided by Hasbro and Mainframe. It wasn't like, we did things without them, they weren't uninvolved, but they also gave us such incredible latitude that they gave us guidance, and they didn't inhibit us from doing anything we really, really wanted to do. So I just want to say out loud that I absolutely, positively loved working on that show. And I am more proud of that show than anything else I have worked on, because we got to work on such a big scale and because we got to work with such incredible characters. I did not want that to get lost with all my gobbledygook talking about, Marvel and X-Men and stuff like that.
Well, we like to hear about everything you've done. But good as an experience as you had writing on Beast Machines, you also had a lot of grief from the fans. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit, if we could.
Sure.
It's well known that you prefer to write about characters that use their brains instead of their guns, and Batman falls into this category. But at one point, this was bent all out of context by certain fans. To paraphrase, let's say, Bob Skir hates America and policemen and freedom because he hates people that use guns. What can you tell us about this?
I can tell you a hell of a lot about that. I'm not a big fan of guns overall. I'm just not. We're coming up to next week, the 30th anniversary of John Lennon's murder, and that was one of the most terrible moments of my life when I heard that he had been killed so utterly senselessly because some guy with a history of mental problems was able to just blithely walk up, buy a gun, cross the street, and shoot one of the most pivotal figures of the 20th century. I don't have the words. I've always hated handguns. That being said, it had nothing to do with Beast Machines. The bottom line on Beast Machines is that we were doing a series for a network, and the network's mandate was no guns. They were able to sneak them in on shows like Batman by being able to, we're using dark deco machines, which were Tommy guns, but because they were able to, sneak them through that way. If you used guns in any of the shows, they had to be futuristic blasters and ray guns and things like that. And a lot of the shows, a lot of the stuff on Beast Wars, although they were futuristic plasma guns, they were very clearly Gatling guns. They were very clearly rifles. They were very, very clearly, they were using guns to the point where they were doing like Sergio Leone movies, which I thought was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. They were even doing the good, the bad, the ugly stuff where time would just stand still.
Right. The John Woo diving through the air in slow motion with all the shell casings flying out.
Yeah, but they also did that thing that Sergio Leone did where you have these three guys in a standoff that takes 1 instant for them to look at each other, but it takes 5 minutes to experience because time stretches. And I'm watching this stuff in Beast Wars and I'm going, this is fucking great! But when we did Beast Machines, it's like, well, okay, you're on a network now, you can't use guns. And I'm thinking, I don't want to use guns. Not because I'm against guns, although I am, although I'm not. I mean, when I write screenplays, I have characters using guns. When, when I watch TV, I watch people using guns. I'm not like, oh my God, there are guns. I mean, in my personal preferences against them, in drama, it's a different thing. But here's the bottom line. If you have robots that can turn into all these different forms and you do all these different things, then they themselves are inherently weapons. They don't need weapons. They are weapons. The X-Men don't need weapons. Why? They are weapons. You're not going to give Cyclops a gun because anybody can hold a gun. Cyclops has these eye beams. The more impressive, the more interesting things you can make him do with those beams, the cooler he is with a character. You put a gun in his hand, he just becomes a guy with a gun. They did a joke cover with the Hulk once where the Hulk is holding this giant gun that's bigger than he is. And it's a hilarious cover. It's a gag because he's the Hulk. He doesn't need a gun. With Elektra, where Elektra had this, she's holding this gun once again bigger than she is, and it's a gag because Elektra could kill you with a paperclip from 500 yards. She don't need no gun, so that's kind of a joke too. So when you have characters who can do these magnificent things, you don't need to give them guns. They can do magnificent things. They don't need a gun. Now, on the board, somebody was like, well, wait a minute. You think that people who use guns are cowards? They're bad? Well, what about my dad was a police officer, and he saved the lives of 6 people because he had a gun, and if he didn't have that gun, those people would be dead right now. So you're calling him a coward? He was a hero. And then suddenly everybody chimes in going, yeah, Bob Skir says this guy's a coward, and oh my God, he hates heroes, and he hates police. And I'm thinking, how did this happen?
Yeah.
And my argument to that is very simple, is I don't even know if the story, maybe this guy's father was a cop, maybe his father wasn't a cop, maybe the whole thing's made up, I mean, let's take the position that the story is absolutely 100% true, that this guy's father is a cop, that the situation did happen, that he saved these people's lives, he saved their lives using a gun, and that everything he said is completely true, and that's how it really happened. And I'm thinking, Godspeed, it's wonderful he saved those people's lives, and I'm sorry he had to use a gun, I'm sure he did too, but sometimes you have to use the force that you have, sometimes you have to use the weapons that you have. Okay, well, that's fine. Would he have been as heroic if he had the power to cling to walls, shoot webs from his wrists, move at spider speed with spider strength, and had used a gun? No. He would have been more heroic. He would have been, it would have been, if he had the ability to do these other things, he wouldn't have needed to use that gun. So my point is, if you have a superhero with superpowers, you don't diminish him by using something that pretty much anybody can pick up and use. you have them do things that nobody else can do. So if you have Spider-Man, you make him do things that only Spider-Man can do. If you have Optimus, you have him do things that only Optimus can do. If you have Rat Trap, you have him do things that only Rat Trap can do. And that makes the characters distinct and unique. So my argument against having guns for heroes is that superheroes don't need guns. If I say that heroes don't need guns, then you think, oh, so some guy in Iraq, he's not a hero if he uses a gun? That's certainly not what I'm saying. So does that clear that up?
That's an excellent explanation. Thank you very much for that. Now, the way I see it is that the Internet is a dark, scary, and very anonymous place, and there are people who will say things and make allegations for no real good reason, and because they know that it can't be traced back to them in real life. So, if things got blown out of proportion, it's no fault of your own. It's just, like I said, the Internet's a dark, scary place.
Just call it what it is. It's cyberbullying. These are people who are probably science fiction fans. They're probably, into all kinds of stuff that gets them a lot of unwanted attention at school. Maybe they get pushed around, maybe not, but they have real strong opinions about the things that they like. And they have such strong opinions that they're going to air them, and online people can be as extreme as they want to be.
Right.
With anonymity. So whereas these people ordinarily be like, I get bullied, I would never be a bully. Well, maybe they don't see it as bullying, but when you hide in the anonymity of your room and you say the most hurtful things you can say to people, and you can do it with impunity because they're not going to. Elvis Costello has a song where he says, you know what, you're going to put this stuff on the Internet. If you think that makes you brave, say it when you're standing in front of me.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody who said the things that they were saying, would be so vastly impolite in person. I don't think that they would, I'm not saying, they're all cowards. They're just hiding. But it's like, I don't think that people would be that strident standing in front of somebody else. I just don't think it's natural for them. And
exactly.
I think that whereas these people would not think of themselves as bullying, what they were doing was there was a lot of cyberbullying going on. And whereas I was really disappointed by how hurtful that they were being toward me, what was more hurtful would be how some of them were treating each other. Such that if somebody was there saying, and this it virtually happened, like almost literally, oh, Bob Skir sucks, he's horrible, all these shows are terrible, he should never work again, this is horrible. And somebody else would respond, I think you're being a little, closed-minded. I think that you're being a little extreme in your points of view. And the response to that from the original poster was, you're trying to censor me. You're horrible. You're a Nazi. You won't let me express my opinions. And I'm like, you have simply got to be joking.
Exactly. Speaking of a loud and opinionated fandom, the story goes that you received death threats from old-school Transformer fans that didn't appreciate the path that the Beast Machine story took. Is this true? And if so, what exactly was said?
There were no death threats. There were people who would say things like, Bob Skir should die and so should his family. Things like not literally, but so.
Mm-hmm.
They would say things that were that bald-faced insulting.
Right.
But nobody said, I'm going to hunt him down and shoot him. Nobody says, if he shows up at BotCon, I'm going to punch him in the face or I'm going to string him up or anything. Nobody actually made an actual tangible threat to me. They didn't. If they had, you would have the evidence of it because people would just repost it and say, they would cut and paste into an email saying, hey, look at what this guy is saying. Or if somebody had said that directly to me, I would have cut and pasted it and said, hey, Transformer fans, is this really one of you? And then people would have weighed in saying, hey, he's right, we should kill you. Or they would have chimed in saying, hey, what a dick, we're sorry that people are like that. We're not all dicks.
You once bowed out of a BotCon appearance. The rumor is going that you were uncomfortable with some of the fans. What is the real story there?
The real story is very simple, and I'm very sorry that I did that because in retrospect I realized I let them know at short notice I wasn't going to be there, which is something I would never do again for the simple reason that they advertise people's presence as being there. So they sold people's tickets saying, these 8 people will be there, and one of them is Bob Skir. And I'm not saying that I was a big draw. I'm just saying that if they're going to advertise I'm going to be there, and I commit to being there, I have a commitment to be there. And I'm sorry I backed out on that. And I'm also sorry because I'm sure that they made arrangements and did all kinds of things to make it possible for me to be there. And so I just feel it was, in retrospect, irresponsible of me to, back out virtually at the last minute. The bottom line is simply this. I was approached by a fan to have an interaction with the fans early on in Beast Machines. They said, hey, the fans would love to know what's going to happen. They'd love to talk with you. Transformer fans are wonderful, and we'd really love to have an open dialogue. And I'm thinking, I've never had this opportunity. That sounds like fun. So I went online, and I answered questions, and the next thing I know, everyone's parsing every comma in whatever I'm posting. Everybody's taking me overly literally. Everybody's, becoming really, really unpleasant. And then when the show aired, the people who were out there who were extremely insulting and extremely nasty and extremely antagonistic toward each other and toward me. I mean, there was such a bad attitude out there that I felt like, you know what? Why should I fly hundreds of miles to be in a hotel surrounded by people who are going to be nasty? So I wasn't afraid someone was going to, kill me. I wasn't afraid someone was going to, punch me in the nose. But my experience with the loudest of the fans was so unpleasant that I just imagined I'm going to go there and be surrounded by unpleasantness.
Right.
Now, I realize in retrospect from years of going to, Comic-Con that I would be approached by people who would be very complimentary about the show, and that if I had gone there, I think that a lot of people would have been a lot more polite and a lot nicer, and it probably would have been a good experience. I'd love to go to Comic-Con in the future and would never back out again. But at that point, I looked at things in terms of a big picture. Comic-Con was the week before. I was going to spend an entire weekend inside a hotel. It was the middle of the summer, and I'm thinking, I'm going to spend the nicest weekend in the summer in a hotel in San Diego instead of using the time outside. The following week, I can fly 800 miles, be surrounded by people who hate me, and be stuck in a hotel again. Or I can drive up to Malibu, I can lie on the beach, I can look at, I'm going to be really shallow here, beautiful women, I can watch dolphins swimming back and forth. So, angry Transformer fans, dolphins. Angry Transformer fans, the beach. Angry Transformer fans, lobster salad for dinner. Angry Transformer fans, I'm going to be very shallow. Beautiful women in bikinis. I
it's an easy choice.
Resistance was not to fly 8,000 miles, but to drive 20 miles, go to the beach and have a nice day, as opposed to, subjecting myself to some people who are going to be very unpleasant. Once again, I would never do that again. Having committed to being at an event, I would certainly go, and if I was ever invited to BotCon again, I would love to go, especially since so much time has passed since the series first aired that I think a lot of the heated passions that people felt about the series would have long since abated. And I think that people would have a much more circumspect way of looking at things, being that it's not the latest series, that the universe has moved on since then, and since they could look at that series in isolation and not as the last final word that is. I mean, people were afraid that, it's like, from now on, Transformers will go down this road and we'll never see our Transformers again. And now that enough time has passed, people can see, okay, well, this was, a small segment of, the Transformers mythology, which we can accept or not accept. And we have all this other stuff we've moved on to and all these other things they're doing now. So I think that people today, people who even hated the series back then, would be a lot less hateful about it now. I think that right now the same people who were like, Bob Skir should die, his whole family should be suffering. Those same people today would probably be like, I really hated that series.
Yeah. Well, plus when you're at a convention, the anonymity is not there anymore.
Hey, I really hated your series, rather than, Bob Skir and his family should die. And actually, the hurtful thing was that my father had just passed away, and
I'm sorry.
hearing people say such hateful things at a time when I was dealing with something so profound. And in fact, here's the thing: is that my father died while we were doing the Transformers series, and so we were on these incredibly tight deadlines. We were working very much under the gun. We were working really, really hard, and I put every bit of myself into that series. And when you're dealing with something as such a profound loss, and at the same time you're working as hard as you can work, and you're working a series, when you're storytelling a series, when you're shepherding a series, as opposed to just running episodes, that show is with you 24/7. Your last thought at night is, what do I need to do tomorrow? Your first thought when you wake up is, what do I have to do today? And it's with you literally 24/7, to the point where this is true. At one point, I met a friend for lunch one day, and I thought to myself, I hope nobody knows I'm out here doing this. I suddenly realized, oh my God, I'm working so hard on this series, I don't think I'm entitled to leave my house to eat. And it's a wonderful feeling because it's all consuming, because you feel like you're really, really in that universe. But at the same time, I mean, how much more could I possibly put into a series? How much more can I possibly, invest myself? And then turn around and have people say such hateful things to me. So, was I afraid for my life? No. Was my life threatened? No. Did I back out of a convention? Yes. Because I had given people everything I had, and they treated me with such disdain and such disrespect. It didn't have to do with fear. It had to do with disrespect. And I don't know that I've ever treated anybody with that level of disrespect. And for me to deal with something that I was dealing with at that point in my life, and to be greeted for my efforts with such vehemence, and mindless vehemence.
That's perfectly understandable.
For me, because I was like I said to you a little bit before we started, I said to you off air that I wasn't really in. I've been a Transformers fan since the first series, the G1 series, but I knew of Beast Wars and Beast Machines, but I didn't really get into it. So, during that whole time that those two series were running, I wasn't that into it. I had just started rewatching Beast Machines, I don't know, about 2 years ago, and I got the DVD set late last year, actually. When I first got this DVD set, I was like, okay, I'm going to put this in. I put in disc 1, and the next thing I know, it was a day and a half later, and I had watched all 26 episodes in a row, and I love it. It's just amazing. So with that said,
that's very gratifying to hear. Thank you very much for saying that. I'm very touched. So thank you.
We were surprised to not see you listed next to Marty Eisenberg in the Transformers animated credits. Is this because of the bad treatment that you had received from your last role as a TF writer? Did they ever approach you on the previous series, the animated show that was done in 2008?
They did not. Marty and I parted ways in 2002. We broke up our partnership, and the two of us were working very, very independently. Marty was offered the series. As the two of us were not working together, I did not work on it. So, it has nothing to do with me and the Transformers or anything. It was just a matter of me and Marty no longer being partners.
Can we ask what happened between the two of you in 2002?
Yeah, it's very simple, is that we grew apart, the two of us were friends for a very long time, and we decided it would be fun to work together and write together, so we did. We had a great time working together. Because we were both really good writers, because we had a really strong partnership, we made up for strengths and weaknesses and whatever that the other. We made up for each other's weaknesses, and we increased each other's strengths, which is what you'd want from a partnership. And we were really, really good writing partners. But over time, we were writing much more and more independently from each other, and we would each take a show and write an episode and send the script back and forth to each other. And we found that over time, we needed less and less help from each other. And so we just felt like it was almost stifling being tied to each other. I mean, there were just times when I just felt like I just want to work on something myself, and he wanted to just work on something himself. So over time, it just felt like we just wanted to be more independent. Marty got married and had kids. I did not get married and didn't have kids. And so we had very, very different life priorities. And so just by virtue of that, we just found ourselves growing apart. And so it reached a point where it's like, you know what, let's just shake hands and go our separate ways and just, we're going to have our own lives and have our own careers. And that's kind of what we did.
What is your favorite character type to write for? Heroes, villains, or is there another type of character you like better? And for you, who gets the best lines?
I think everybody gets the best lines as long as they're writing from their own point of view. I think that a tertiary character like Gambit, it can be just as funny or, add just as much to a story as a character who really belongs in the forefront like Cyclops or Wolverine. So the short answer to your question is my favorite character to write is the one with the strongest point of view and the most inner conflict, which is why Wolverine to me is the ultimate character because he is so deeply driven by so many different conflicting forces. He's really, really noble at the same time as he's really, really savage. They keep finding new things for him to sort of be or have, which was wonderful for a very long time but became counterproductive. So for a long time he was sort of this military secret agent guy. Then they added the whole fallen samurai thing, and that was all really, really cool. When they started adding all the counter-espionage stuff and how his memories are implanted and this and that, he just became too muddled for me. But at his core, what you're dealing with is a character who is so dark and so driven and so complex, and that to me is the most interesting character. The same thing is like one of the reasons that people find Batman so much more interesting than Superman is Superman is very, very stalwart. He's like this very, square-jawed Boy Scout trying to do the right thing. Batman is driven by very dark and painful memories. Now, Superman and Batman are essentially very, very similar. They both lost their parents. They're both dedicated to saving the world because of what happened to their parents. Superman saves the world on a global level. His planet blew up. Batman wants to deal with street crime and things on a much more urban sort of street level because his parents were gunned down in an alley. But the two of them are driven to make the world right based on the fact that they lost their parents and see that the world should be better than it is. Batman is more of an avenger. Superman is more of a protector. But Batman is more fascinating to people because he is driven by demons that Superman will probably never have. And watching Batman as somebody who is dark and conflicted makes him inherently more interesting. So you see, the more the characters have going on, the more layered the characters are, the more interesting they become to write and to perceive. I brought back one of the characters in the second season of Transformers, of Beast Machines.
Silverbolt?
I brought Silverbolt back, having had him be Skybolt. Was that his name? What was the name of the character? It's been so long.
It was Jetstorm originally was the original character, and then you would sit in the commentary on the DVD that the original name for Jetstorm was Skybolt.
And Skybolt,
but people would always get it.
It was actually Silverbolt. So anyway, Jetstorm was this incredibly horrible villain who turns out to be this white knight. And when they first introduced the character, when he was in Beast Wars, to me, he sounded like Adam West's Batman. He was so noble. He was so square-jawed. And that was kind of like the joke. It's kind of the character is so noble that he's sort of like, he's like Sir Lancelot, as a Transformer. And it's sort of, I'm not saying this is, he was just a joke. I'm not like mocking the character. I'm saying it's sort of like being in the joke. He was more noble than noble, and that made him at once admirable and somewhat goofy. So when I brought him back, I replaced Adam West with Frank Miller. I brought him back as the Dark Knight. I brought him back as somebody who had done these terrible things, not because he had been hypnotized or whatever, or because he was mind-controlled. It was because something dark was unleashed inside him that he now has to deal with. So it's like, what do you remember from what you did? I remember everything, and I liked it. So he's got to fucking deal with this. And so he came back as this extremely fallen samurai character, as somebody who really, really needed redemption because he had been taken somewhere darker than you can possibly imagine, and he had to find his way to make himself feel right again. And it was the perfect pair-up with Arachnia, because Arachnia was somebody who had been a villain, who had become a hero, who herself had very, very dark layers to her. So having her, having been villainous, now being a hero, looking at somebody who had been a hero, like the most noble of heroes, who had been made into the most nasty, vicious of villains. He's trying to find redemption, and she only wants to help him, and she only wants to love him, and she can't reach him because he is darker than she's ever been. So I thought that was, so he became a very, very interesting character to spearhead there because, well, as I say, you know, he's dark, he's conflicted, and he's dealing with things that are not so easily resolved, you know? This isn't Goodwill Hunting. You can't just look at him and say, it's not your fault, it's not your fault, it's not your fault, it's not your fault. Robert, after 5 minutes of it's not your fault, the guy's like, oh, you know what? It's not my fault. I'm happy chocolate. It's more like, okay, I'm dealing with things I have to live with. And that's really fucking hard. Yeah. And in life, we all make decisions, we all make mistakes, things happen that may or may not even be our fault. And we have to live with the consequences, you know? And that makes interesting drama. That makes interesting characters.
And keeping with the same vibe of favorite writing, what was your favorite show to work on?
You know, the weird thing is, it's that any given show that I'm working on becomes my favorite show at the time, because when you find something to hook into that makes the show yours, you just invest yourself 100%. I'm doing a preschool series right now, and I'm finding that I'm working just as hard, being just as inventive, thinking just as hard into the characters, even though they're simple, bright-colored characters, than I would be on any other show. So it isn't like, oh, this show's easy and that show's hard. It's more like, how much of yourself are you investing in it? Are you really, really present when you're doing the show? And so with each of the shows that I've written, any show that I can find myself getting lost in, any show that I can work on for 8 hours, look up and feel really guilty and go, what am I doing? I have to get to work now. And realizing that that's what I've been doing. So when I equate working really hard with having fun, then that's my favorite show to work on. And I've worked on a lot of shows where that's been the case. So I guess the short answer is, my favorite show is all of them. It's kind of pithy. But with a lot of the shows, I mean, I've had the pleasure of working on shows that I could just invest myself wholeheartedly in. And one of the reasons that I have such an abiding love for Beast Machines is that because we did this 26-episode novel for television, we needed to be present 1,000% of the time. We needed to come up with an arc. We needed to outline each of the episodes ourselves. We needed to make sure that the dialogue matched up in a way that each character was along a trajectory in an arc so that they were growing and changing in every episode in a way that linearly made sense. I had to work so hard on that series, harder than anything I've ever had to do before, since, or whatever, because we did this thing as a 26-episode singular monolithic thing. And so for the duration of the series, which was about a year, it's like it was 24/7, living in a universe, inhabiting these characters, and following every one of them, many of whom were extremely complex. And to immerse yourself for a year in a universe like that is an experience that I just treasure it. It was so immersive, and it was like living in a video game, but like your whole life. I mean, it was so immersive and so all-encompassing that I loved it. But there was a price to be paid because when it's over, I was feeling so burnt. Because burnt out. It's just like when you invest so much, you come away and it's like you've been playing basketball for a year. You just want to collapse. So I gave that series everything I had, and I did it for a year straight. It's one of the reasons that when you read online, Bob Skir should die. It's like, well, kick me in the teeth, why don't you? And then my favorite part about that, though, with the fans, like the bad reaction was, there were these fans going, I hate the show. It's horrible. It's terrible. And they're making us wait another year before they show us the rest of the episodes.
Exactly.
And the funny thing about Beast Wars and Beast Machines now is that a lot of the fans, and us included, a lot of the fans think that Beast Wars and Beast Machines is easily the best fictional writing in Transformers in the entire fandom.
That's very gratifying to hear, but my response to that is that, that's a group of people whose opinion I find very, very complimentary. But for that number of people, there's an equal number that thought that G1 is the only Transformers, or that maybe, I don't know, Armada is the only. I mean, everybody's.
Well, see, there's a different Transformers for every generation. However, most diehard Transformers fans have since moved on from their Beast Machines hatred and realized, hey, it's an actually good show, and have pushed their hatred towards the imported shows such as Robots in Disguise, Armada, Energon, and Cybertron.
Right. Yeah. It could have been worse. It could have been imported from Japan.
Yeah, but the bottom line is that for every series out there, there are people who will argue, this is mine. This is the one that I treasure the most. This is the definitive one for me. And I find that gratifying that there's this thing out there that people have such affection for, I love that there are people out there who love Transformers with such passion, have so much invested in it. I love that, there are people who are fans. I love that there are things out there that give people this kind of passion, Star Wars was out there, and it filled me with incredible passion. X-Men, at its best, filled me with an incredible passion. And so the fact that Transformer fans are simply, I'm not even, because you're on the phone with you guys, this is a simple fact. They are the most passionate fans I've ever experienced in all of fandom. They are more passionate than Star Trek fans, Star Wars fans, anybody. They are the absolute most passionate fans out there. And I just think it's wonderful that there are people out there who are so invested in it, and that each generation, people find things that they like. In fact, what I said when I first was on when we were putting Beast Machines together, and we had the fan outreach, what I said was, listen, I need to let you know, I'm not coming from this as a Transformers professional. I did not work in the original series. Also, I did not follow the original series with the kind of passion and focus that a lot of fans did. So, if this series is not what you're expecting, I need you to know that you should not expect this to be the show as you've seen it before. This is something different. So I'm hoping that you come to it with a slightly open mind, because you're going to have to. Right. And I also felt a certain amount of guilt about it, because there are these incredible fans, with such incredible passion. And I knew that when I was doing X-Men, the changes that they made, I'm sorry, there's a little beeping coming through, the changes that people made to the X-Men mythology, inconsistencies or whatever, made me insane. And so I'm thinking, if I'm this passionate about X-Men, and I don't want to see them tampering with what I consider to be my holy grail, I'm forever mindful that I'm dealing with something and tampering with something that are other people's holy grail. So I need to let them know that this is not going to be, their traditional Transformer series.
Right.
And I wasn't trying to steer them away going, hey, you don't want to watch this show. But it's more like, this is going to be different from what you're expecting. Please keep an open mind. You may love it, and it may not be for you. And if it isn't, the next series will be. But, just know. And also, this needs to be said out loud. The reason they hired Marty and I is because we didn't have a history with Transformers. They wanted people with a very fresh perspective on it, and they were creating the series for a new generation of fans. They weren't looking to harken back to nostalgia for the past. they were looking to create nostalgia for the future. So they hired us because we were coming to it with a fresh perspective. And when we asked, hey, do you want to let us watch all the old shows? The answer was, we'd rather you didn't. We'd rather you just, took what you were doing here and made it your own, which we did, which some people appreciated and some people apparently did not.
As a writer, what is the weirdest thing that has happened to you?
Oh, God, I've had no end of weird things happen to me. I mean, wow. I'll give you 2 stories.
Okay.
I'll give you 2 stories. I'm going to give you 2 stories, and I will tell you right now, okay? They are 100% true. I'm not embellishing on them in any way. These are things that actually happened as I'm telling you. One is that I have a license plate on my car that says SNCT.
Okay, that's weird right there. Okay.
Right. So I live in an apartment building that doesn't have like hoses or whatever, and I live in Los Angeles and the car gets really, really dusty. And I drive up the block to go get something to eat, and there's a newsstand there where somebody's hosing down the sidewalk. And I'm like, hey, that guy's got a hose and it's on. Why don't I hose all the dust off my car? And I look at the guy and I go, hey, can I use your hose for a second? And English is not his first language, so I don't think he quite understands what I'm saying, but he kind of nods. And so I take the hose and I start hosing off my car. And suddenly he's making this face like he's kind of put out by what I'm doing. And he starts stepping on the hose to kind of like kill the water pressure. And he's kind of like making faces at me. And I'm thinking, I just want to hose off my car. I'm not going to use all your water, dude. I just want to hose off my car a little bit. And he's kind of like attitude. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'll just put the hose down and move on with my life. And he goes, so what does that mean? I'm like, excuse me? Your license plate. What does that mean? I go, oh, that's, SNCT. It's the sound of Wolverine's claws, like in the X-Men. I write the cartoon, and the next thing you know, he's got a pail out, he's putting soap in it, and he's soaping down my car. I'm like, oh my God, this is an attitude change.
I was thinking that maybe SNCT meant something rude in his language.
No.
Yeah. Anyway, other story. Once again, this is 100% true. I'm not making this up. I'm not embellishing. This happened. I working in Los Angeles on Beast Machines. An executive from Mainframe flies down, and we have a meeting. He flies back, and I fly back at the same time on the same flight because I'm going back for a voice record session. The two of us are on the flight together. But he's flying, back home, and I'm flying up there to come home. So we go to customs, and the customs is like, well, are you here for business or, personal? And I'm here for business. He goes, are you flying alone, sir? Yeah, I'm flying alone. Who was that man you just looked at? Excuse me? Now, this is before 9/11, so, but still, people are just fanatical about security and whatever. I've looked over at the producer to figure out what the right answer would be. Am I traveling with someone or am I traveling by myself? And I'm like, so he's like, who is that man you looked at, sir? And I'm thinking, okay,
busted.
Am I going to get strip searched now? And I'm like, oh, well, he's someone that I was flying with, but we're not traveling together. He came down for a meeting, and I'm flying up for a meeting, then I'm flying home. So we flew together, but we're not traveling together. And now I'm just word salad-ing, right? Because I know I'm in for a cavity search. And I'm like, whatever words fly out of my mouth, I hope they make sense to somebody. Because in 5 seconds, I'm going to be in a room and it's going to be really unpleasant. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm flying up for a TV show. They work at Mainframe. They do cartoons, kind of CGI, like Toy Story, CGI. I'm doing a show. It's a Transformer series. Transformers? Is Starscream coming back?
Oh, yeah.
And my jaw drops. And I'm like, yeah. Starscream's coming back.
Oh my God, that is so fun.
There are so many Transformer fans out there.
Nice.
We are everywhere. We are Legion.
We are Legion.
All I know is I was really damn glad I was working on the Transformer series at that particular moment.
I bet you were.
No backroom searches for you. Have you ever been asked to write something that you didn't want to write? Like, I don't know, Morph? Just to throw that out there.
You know what? There have been times out there where I have not taken opportunities that I have since said, oh, wait a minute, kind of wish I had done that. There was a character I hated on The Mask called Dr. Pretorius. Now, first off, I hate the character because the name is such an obvious lift. For those people out there who remember the old Universal horror movies, like Bride of Frankenstein, where Dr. Pretorius' name was lifted from. Okay, fine. Didn't like the name of the character. But I hated the character. He was a stupid character. It was a ridiculous character. So I did not write the character. And then I'm like, when the series is over, Tim Curry did the voice for that guy. I could have written for Tim Curry. I could have met Dr. Frankenfurter. I could have hung out with Tim Curry. Oh, man, I wish I wrote that fucking character. So I really regretted that one. There was a time, this one breaks my heart. When I did Batman, there's an episode called Lockup. And Lockup begins where they're bringing a villain back to Arkham Asylum. And what they suggested was, they're bringing the Mad Hatter back. And I'm like, they're bringing the Mad Hatter back and he's afraid to go inside. The reason he's afraid to go inside is because the guard, Lockup, who works in there, is insane and brutalizes everybody. And I'm thinking, they're bringing the Mad Hatter back and he's afraid to go inside. That doesn't mean anything. The Mad Hatter's a puss. If it's the Scarecrow, if it's the Master of Fear, and he's afraid of this guy, that's carrying some weight. And I'm going, hey, it should be the Scarecrow. And the guy's like, yeah, but we really want to work with Roddy McDowell. And I'm like, Roddy McDowell? Yeah, he's the Mad Hatter. The Mad Hatter is the perfect guy for this scene. And so I write the scene with the Mad Hatter, and I'm really, really psyched because I've come up with some really cool shit for him. Like at one point, they're dragging him in, and he's going hysterical, and he shoves his face into Robin's and says, beware the Jabberwock, my son, the teeth that claw, the claws that tear. And I'm like, so proud, right? It's like, hey, that's great. So what happens? I get to rewrite the script, and they put the Scarecrow in it. Because the Scarecrow's the Master of Fear, and it means so much more if it's the Scarecrow than if it's the Mad Hatter.
Of course.
And I'm thinking, I blew my chance to write for Roddy McDowell. I made such a great argument that I talked myself out of writing for Roddy McDowell. So I got to write for Roddy McDowell, but it got unwritten because I'm too clever by half. Let me see. I know there are things I walked away from because I didn't want to do them. Oh, yeah, this is terrible. They did a series based on a movie that they had done that was kind of successful, not really successful, but successful enough. It was middling. It was sort of science fiction-y undersea movie that was really good, but was just okay. And anyway, they're doing a series based on it, and they brought my partner and I in to work on the series based on the movie. And the movie is based in an incredible land. And I'm thinking it would be wonderful to explore this land. So I show up for the first day of work. And I find out, we're not actually going to explore that land. We're back in our world trying to find our way back into that land. And I'm like, so we're not in that magical land. Oh, no. So we're here trying to get back. Yeah, with lots of adventures trying to get back. At least I get to work at this incredible studio, which is, so beautiful and beautifully sculpted and is an incredible place to work, filled with magic. Yeah, we're not working on the studio, working down the block at this bank building.
Oh.
So I get to work in a bank on a show about people who are trying to get somewhere magical but are not actually in and of themselves in someplace magical.
Wow.
Art imitates life.
Yeah, you know what? Can I and the next day, I had my agent call up and say, yeah, he's not on your show anymore.
That's funny.
That was one of the biggest mistakes I ever made professionally, because my agent worked hard to get me on that show, and I said I would do the show. And then I backed out of the show once I realized that the show I agreed to do wasn't the show that I thought it was when I agreed to do it, which is really unfair to my agent. So I felt really terrible that I had done that. Not something I would have done again necessarily, but it was a case where I looked at a property, I realized I didn't really believe in the property, and I didn't want to just go there and collect a paycheck. 8 weeks later, the show got shuttered, and they sent everybody home and said, yeah, we're not going to do the show. So my instincts were right, my tastes were right, I followed my heart and my gut, and I was right. I was vindicated ultimately because the series wasn't worth doing. But in the meantime, it made me look kind of stupid and flaky to the studio, and I'm not stupid or flaky. And it also made me look unreliable to my agent, which was unfair to her. So I made the right choice, but I made it the wrong way, and so I kind of regret doing that. It's just that particular situation was not a situation that I felt like I would walk away from with any degree of pride. I need to work on things where when I'm finished with them, I say, I did the job, we did a great show, and I invested myself in that, and I got something for it. And I didn't feel that was a case where that was going to be the case. And I did not, and today could not, just take a gig just to take somebody's money, because that's just not how I do things.
Right.
In fact, there was a case, a similar situation, where I was offered a chance to write a pilot. And I read a previous draft of the pilot, and I'm like, okay, well, if you do this, 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 and this, I think it would work. And they're like, yeah, we don't want to do that, and that. We want to do the other. And I'm like, yeah, but that's why it doesn't work. And they're like, okay, I see what you're saying. Now, we want to hire you to write this, but we want to do the other. And I'm like, you want me to write a script knowing that everything that I think will make this work, you don't want me to do, and you want me to make me do everything that I think is the reason this isn't working. And I'm like, I just don't feel like this is a good fit. I'm sorry, but I can't take your money and give you something that will not make you happy, and I don't know how to make this make you happy. So, with all due respect, this is not a slam. I feel like I cannot in good conscience take this job because I can't make you happy.
Right.
And,
well, there's the artistic integrity.
It isn't even a matter of artistic integrity. It's more a matter of professionalism and professional integrity.
Right.
It isn't like hey, you can't do that with Wolverine. I'm going to shut you all down. It's more like if you make me write this, you're not going to be happy, I'm going to be miserable, and I'm going to feel like a thief for cashing your check.
Right. What advice would you have for people who would want to get into television writing, movie writing, or anything like that?
It's what I said before, Find the things that drive you and follow them. And conversely, don't try and follow trends. There are people out there who say, oh, this kind of movie's hot right now, I'm going to write one. That kind of movie's hot right now because there are 7 of them in theaters, 14 of them in the pipeline, and they want something else. So I'm writing right now a romantic comedy because I have one that I've been working on for a long time. I would not begin to work on a romantic comedy today because that seems like the hot thing to do. And once it's the hot thing to do, it's no longer the hot thing to be doing. So don't look at what the trends are. Look at what you want to do and follow what you want to do. A million people out there have tried to do Star Wars, and they failed because George Lucas did Star Wars when no one else was doing Star Wars because he wanted to do that movie. If you follow what you want to do and no one else is doing that kind of thing and you're that crazy-ass passionate about it, follow that. back in the early 90s, there were this guy said, you know what? I'm going to do a film noir. No one does film noir. I'm going to do a film noir. I'm going to reference all kinds of TV shows from the 70s, and I'm going to use has-been actors, and I'm going to tell the story completely out of order. There you go. And the next thing you know, you have Pulp Fiction, and everybody wants to be Quentin Tarantino.
Yep.
Before he did Pulp Fiction, if this guy walked in and said, this is what I want to do, they would have taken his name down, put him on a list of people never to be allowed in the building again. The thing is, if you are passionate about something, if you're quirky, if you're weird, if you have a different way of looking at shit, follow that. Don't follow everybody else. Basically, follow your own instincts, because they will serve you.
Exactly.
And don't write for money. Write things that are important to you. If it's important enough to you that you're going to invest all the time to write something, 120 pages, it could take you forever to write a screenplay. If you were that crazy about writing something and nobody else is doing that kind of thing, then clearly somebody else is going to be as passionate as you are about that kind of thing and want to do it. Quentin Tarantino found people who looked into this weird-ass screenplay because they saw the same things in his ideas that he saw in them to make them write them. I mean, he already made the critically acclaimed Reservoir Dogs, but even that was, once again, noir, shot out of order, using, weird character actors who had never been heard of before. Because if you look at that movie, right, I mean, Lawrence Tierney was a movie star in the 40s. Nobody even remembered he was alive. Steve Buscemi, who? All these weird character actors no one had ever heard of before. Now they're household names. But, but back then they were like, I'm sorry, who do you want to put in this movie? And so he followed his weird whims. He based a lot of that movie on City on Fire, some Hong Kong movie nobody knew before. He gets all of his influences from bad 70s movies, bad 70s TV series, and Hong Kong action movies and chop sake movies. Mm. Now, he's not someone you want to follow into a battlefield in 1991. Ever since 1994, everybody wants to be him.
Yep.
So
we would like to.
If you have a weird, quirky way of looking at something, if you have passions, follow your passions. They will take you where you want to end up, ultimately. It's what Joseph Campbell said, you follow your bliss.
We would like to thank Mr. Skir for taking the time to talk with us. If people wanted to interact with you, where can they go to do this?
I've gone down that road before. You know what? I'm on Facebook. If you want to send me an email, message me through Facebook. I'll respond to emails and messages through Facebook. So, feel free to do that. Just keep the hoping my family all dies to a minimum is all I ask.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us here, and good luck with all your current work. We'll ask you to hold the line, and we will be back after this.
So I'm a tree hugger. Deal with it.
Wow. That was awesome. Longest interview ever.
Yeah.
Is that spelled with a E-V-A-R? Or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Nice.
Lols. Yeah. Try to keep your internet memes out of the interview.
That's what she said.
It was great to talk to Bob Skir. It was just awesome.
It was a good conversation. We were schooled. I mean, the guy is a UCLA professor.
Yep.
We got an actual lesson here.
We got pwned.
Yeah.
Owned. Yeah.
Very, very cool. Bob Skir is probably what we're gonna end on for interviews for Beast Unleashed, which is, a very good note to end on. Yeah, very
nice
good.
Guy.
Very awesome guy.
Yeah.
Just great.
I know what I'm gonna do next time. I don't want to go to BotCon. Yeah, I'm gonna head out to Malibu and check out the hot chicks out on the beach. Get in the tan. Me and Bob checking out the chicks in Malibu.
That's what she said.
Maybe she did. I don't know. Bob's a nice
and
guy.
your wife would kill you.
What? That's a risk I'll have to take.
How many licks does it take? Oh, wait, wrong question.
Okay, so we hope everybody enjoyed the interview with Bob Skir. Up next, you'll hear episode 29 coming up in the schedule for releases for Beast Unleashed. Actually, I think I'm going to have Steve release the interview and episode 29 same day, maybe next day. I don't know yet. So that's going to do it for us, and we'll see you next time.
We must seek the balance, Megatron. Not only between the organic and the technological, but the balance between eternal enemies. Between you and I! The great transformation awaits, Megatron. Prepare to be reformatted.
What happened? What is this place?
Believe it or not, this is Cybertron. Or what used to be Cybertron.
I don't get it. I felt Megatron reaching into my Spock, and then... poof.
No, there was another voice, remember?
Optimus. What about Botanica?
Somebody call my name.
Sprouts! So I'm a tree hugger. Deal with it.
It's beautiful, but it could use a little something.
Oh, yeah. Whoa!
Transform your destiny. Transform and transcend.
I understand.
He did it. He really did it. The menace is past. At last, we can truly be together, dark venom of my heart.
Ugh, of all the corny...
Waspinator want glory, Waspinator want power, and what Waspinator get? Waspinator never get what Waspinator want!
It just doesn't feel like victory without the boss monkey.
He's with us, Rat Trap. As long as Cybertron is alive, Optimus lives on. In our hearts and our memories. As will Megatron, who also played a vital role in the grand scheme. The vision from the Oracle has come to pass. Optimus finally achieved his mission.